Didn't this week go fast? Wow. It's not long and it's going to be September. Wow. That's going to make me another year older. Welcome each and every one, and we are here to come to listen to some very, very important messages and information that can help us to live a better life. And don't we all need that? Thanks, Rach.
Okay, so a couple of questions I'm going to start with from last week. Some common questions, actually. So one was about margarines and are they healthy or not? I wouldn't put them down as a health food at all. They are still very highly processed oils, so it's not something that I would consider a whole food, even though it might come from plants. Most of them are still quite high as well in saturated fats, and even though we're working quite hard at doing this in this country, we still haven't got rid of all the trans fats out of our margarines, and they're very dangerous as well. Now, they're high in omega-6, and we don't have a diet that's very high in omega-3, and we need a good balance of those. So margarines tend to push the balance in the wrong direction, and of course they're often filled with a lot of food additives such as colourings and things like that. Margarine wouldn't be yellow without the colouring. So that's just a couple of little pointers about margarines. Better options, of course, using cold-pressed virgin olive oil. And I will say, always get Australian brands. Most of the other brands that come in from overseas are adulterated with other types of oils. Whole nut butters for both sweet and savoury, but always use sparingly because they are very high in fats. And the other one was about coconut oils, and I'll add into this coconut cream, coconut milk. These products do actually increase your risk of vascular disease, so strokes and heart attack. So when you look at the research into the benefits of coconut, it's not the oil, it's the coconut fruit. And so that's what's giving you the benefits, but it's in its whole form, so it still has all its fibre and other goodness in it, so it kind of counteracts some of the effects. But once you extract out the fats and make your milks, your creams and your oils, you lose those benefits. And it's actually been shown to be one of the most potent agents for elevating cholesterol in your blood. It's very high in a particular saturated fat called myristic acid, and then of course you're going to increase that cholesterol. So no, it's not good. It can stop arteries from relaxing for quite a few hours after consumption, and by the way, that's even for the MCT as well. So that's been a big promotion around that, but in actual fact that puts up your bad LDL cholesterol by about 15%. So no, it's not a health food. MCT, medium chain triglycerides, so it's basically an extract out of coconut oil as well. So it's a highly processed form of the coconut oil. But it's been hailed as this big wonder oil that we can all have and it helps all these other things. Not true. So that's those two. Hopefully that answers those questions for those who asked. Alright, now today we're going to have a look, this evening we're going to have a look at weight management, in particular healthy weight management, because when it comes to the weight of the Australian nation, we're in a complete crisis now. Many of us at some stage have struggled with our weight, but we also know that there are 1,000 voices out there with all sorts of claims and all sorts of things to be the greatest, the easiest, most successful. All of that tends to be quite overwhelming, so what I've done is spent a couple of years trying to get the best information together, the safest and the healthiest, and the most effective way of doing this naturally. But before we do that, let's have a look at some of the current statistics. So 25% of children in our country are overweight or obese. When you break it down, nearly 10% fall into the obese category, and then the remainder in the overweight. So it's a fairly equal ratio between the boys and girls. About 67% or 2/3 of the adults in Australia are overweight or obese, and 36% fall in the overweight and 31% in the obese range. So in adults, there are more men than women in that overweight and obese category. Now these numbers were calculated a few years ago now, but it's actually projected that the number of overweight and obese is probably over about 70% now, and we still haven't plateaued yet. So certainly we know that it's doubled in the last decade. And then the indirect and direct cost on the economy is at least $12 billion each year just from being overweight or obese. And we know that every day, at least 140 Australians will die from obesity-related diseases. Now, the drivers for obesity are not complex. There's two. The first is a decline in physical activity. We're all living much more sedentary lives. Our jobs, our work, obviously sedentary. We have a changing mode of transportation than we had in the past. We are more urbanised, and these are contributing to that. Only 100 years ago, our ancestors, both children and adults, were using up to somewhere between 3 to 5 times more energy than we are now because they were far more active. And the second driver, again, is the intake of energy-dense foods, highly processed sugars, animal fats and proteins. All of these things are our modern foods. They're very fast, easy to obtain with our busy lives, and often we resort to all these unhealthy, processed, pre-prepared things for us. Now let's define overweight and obesity. There's a couple of ways we can do this. This one is the one that's most well known, and that's the body mass index. And so that's your weight in kilograms divided by your height in metres squared. Now, if you're between 18.5 and 25, you're considered to be in the healthy weight range. 25 to 30 is overweight, and over 30 is obese. Now, this particular method is limited. It doesn't distinguish between fat and muscle mass, and so therefore it's not useful in a number of different ethnic groups. It's certainly not useful in athletes and also some people with physical disabilities. Now, the next one's probably a little bit more helpful, and I tend to use this one in conjunction with people's weight so that they can actually often see the differences a lot sooner, and that is waist circumference. Now, waist circumference actually measures your visceral fat. Now, this is a bad kind of fat that you store around your abdomen and your chest as well, but we're measuring around the abdomen here. So, to measure your waist, it's halfway between your lowest rib, and you can usually feel that quite well, and the top of your hip bone, which is roughly, if you go halfway between, that's roughly where your belly button would sit. Now, when you're measuring your waist circumference, it's not a case of standing and sucking in. That's cheating. So you actually have to breathe out and relax and let your stomach go to its maximum girth. And then you measure that then and see what that actually says. Don't squeeze the skin either. You're not trying to pull that really tight. All right, so there's your numbers. If you're a woman, you really do need to be below that 80 centimetres, and in men, less than 93 centimetres, to reduce that risk of a number of chronic diseases. Now, before I talked about that visceral fat, this is a really good example of a picture of a healthy heart and then an unhealthy heart that's surrounded by that visceral fat. Now, we used to think fat was just a place where you just stored excess energy. Okay, we've got a bit of excess energy, we'll put it into our fat stores. However, the fat that builds up around your chest and around your abdomen is far more dangerous than the fat, say, in the arms or the legs. And it's because this type of fat actually builds up on your organs, and then it releases a whole host of toxic compounds and hormones. And these cause a variety of problems, such as decreasing your body's sensitivity to insulin. It stimulates the uncontrolled growth of some cells, which can lead to cancer. It can interfere even with your body fluid balance. It promotes atherosclerosis, or the buildup of bad fats in your blood vessels, and it disrupts the electrical activity in the heart as well, and can even cause arrhythmia. So overall, though, we know that this visceral fat and the toxic things that it produces causes a chronic low-grade inflammation over the entire body. And we're going to have a look at that one in a bit more detail tomorrow. We're going to have a look at inflammation and oxidative stress. Now, the good news is we can lose that visceral fat and significantly reduce the risk of a whole host of diseases. And we're going to have a look at how we can do this very soon. But in this scan, what you're seeing, it's the red bits I'm looking at there. So the red bits that you're seeing in that scan is what it looks like before and after lifestyle interventions to get rid of that visceral fat, which is in the red. The yellow bit is just that subcutaneous fat, which is not great, but it's not as bad as the visceral fat. So let's have a look more closely at some of those chronic diseases related to obesity. People who are overweight and obese are up to 2.5 times more likely to develop heart disease than those who have normal weight. Being overweight more than doubles your risk of having a stroke. Nearly 80% of cases of high blood pressure in men and 65% of high blood pressure in women is attributable to being overweight or obese. It is the leading risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Obese people are 80 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes compared to thin people. Being overweight or obese increases your risk of a whole variety of cancers, including bowel and breast cancer, esophageal, stomach and gallbladder, kidney, liver and pancreatic cancer, thyroid, ovarian and uterine cancer. Pretty much from here to here, where that visceral fat sits and produces all those toxic chemicals, that's all the regions that you're going to develop cancer with chronic inflammation. Now, we all know that one of the big things that being overweight or obese affects is the musculoskeletal system. It's the primary driver behind the development of osteoarthritis and the deterioration of those joints, not just because of the sheer pressure, but also because of the inflammation. It's also associated with the development of fatty liver disease, which causes inflammation and can even lead to liver cirrhosis. Gallstone formation, particularly stones made up of cholesterol, is associated with being overweight or obese. And when you're overweight or obese, your kidneys have to work a whole lot harder, which makes them more prone to developing chronic kidney disease. Obstructive sleep apnea is most commonly found in those who are overweight and obese. Interestingly, obesity has also been shown to increase the risk of developing depression irrespective of the body image. So now, all of these things, we can definitely mitigate the risks associated with being overweight and obese just by adopting some really good, healthy weight management things that we can do. And we're going to have a look at that program. So the very first thing that we need to do is to manage the mindset. It all starts in the mind. The right mindset, you'll get the right results. The best place to start is from the highest level, your spirituality. So we need to place the right value on the gift of life and the body we've been given to live in. So here's a couple of verses that you can read and ponder as you start your journey to healthy weight management. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own, for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. So not only do we belong to God by creation, but you are also paid for by the life of Jesus. So we are worth double the value. And this one as well in 1 Corinthians, but chapter 10, verse 31. Therefore, whatever you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. So every choice you make for your health, you have to ask yourself, is this the best thing? Is this something that God would want me to put into my body? All right. Does everyone know what this little creature is? We have a relative of this that we know very well, but this is actually the black widow spider. So what you're seeing there is the male and the female of the species. The big one is the girl and the small one is the boy. Now, to keep the species going, obviously, the male is lured towards the female, finds her very attractive, and that's a pleasure-seeking instinct that's driving the male. Now, this is where it gets very interesting if you watch a little video and see what's actually happening. He kind of goes, because he's super attracted, and then he goes, oh, this is a bit dangerous, and he backs away, and he's backwards and forwards, but eventually his attraction wins out. And they mate, and you think that would be a lovely part of the story, but that doesn't end there. Because as the male goes to escape, the female does something. She sees a moment to have a very easy meal, and she grabs him and eats him, and he obviously becomes her dinner. But why am I telling this story? Because it introduces us to motivational forces that actually affect all of us. All living creatures are driven by these motivational forces. That is seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. Remember, he was going backwards and forwards, going, oh, she's a bit big. But, obviously seeking pleasure won out. And the other one's conserving energy. Remember, she thought, this is an easy meal. I'm going to grab my opportunity and I'm going to eat this guy. So those three forces of motivation have been described by a couple of doctors in the US, and they've written some interesting material regarding how this impacts on our dietary behaviours. And this is the work of those two doctors. So in phase 1, if you look on that chart there, this is us. We're eating a fantastic, healthy diet, a whole food, plant-based diet with lots of those fantastic low-calorie density foods, and obviously lots of those antioxidants and nutrients. Then you get invited to a party. And while they don't have a lot of great foods there, there's actually not a lot there, but you know what? We're at a party, you don't do this all the time, and you decide to eat some pizza and a few chips, and your chocolate cake comes out, and I'll have a piece of that as well. And so what you're getting is what we call supranormal stimuli foods. These are the foods that really fire off. They're calorie dense, and they fire off those pleasure centers in your brain that were there to create and enhance pleasure response. But there's another motivational force that sometimes pushes us in that direction, and that's conserving energy. So if you just went to heat up a single slice of pizza, just a normal pre-made piece of cheese pizza, 100 to 120 grams, not a lot, you just stick it in the microwave or in the oven, you pretty much don't expend any energy at all, and you come out with about 300 calories in that piece. But if you had to prepare the equivalent weight of a green salad, for example, not only are you using up energy with the time that you're taking to prepare it, but you only get about 20 calories in that meal. So we also know that what's driving us into that is also that concept of conserving energy. Now, you went out, you had a big dinner of all this sort of food, and you come home the next day, you're still being driven by those same sorts of pleasure-seeking instincts, and you start reaching for those foods again the next day, and the next day you start introducing all those foods back in. But instead of getting a sustained pleasure response, it normalizes back down into that blue zone. So even though you're eating these high, usually pleasure-driven foods, your body or your brain recalibrates to saying this is normal. So you don't feel so good, you decide it's time to go and see a doctor. You come and see someone like me, and I do a quick assessment of your nutritional intake, and I say it's time to make a change. Remember what you were like a few months ago? Let's go back to that, because then you'll start to feel a lot better. And you make this commitment, you're going to go home, you're going to go back to your whole food plant-based diet, lots of those really good foods, and then what happens? Your poor brain goes, oh man, I do not feel good eating this food. And so you get a nosedive into the subnormal pleasure zone. But you know what? You're really good guys, and you decide I'm going to persist with this. After a couple of weeks, it recalibrates up to the normal pleasure zone again if you're staying on those foods. But not all of us tend to do that. Sometimes we go home, we try, we fail, but this is not going to be worth it, and we go back to bad foods. But it's always there. That pleasure trap is there. And look, their mechanisms are there put for our benefit, but they can also be used to obviously harm us as well. And I would like to add, it's not just calorie density that's firing off those pleasure centers, but it's food additives as well. And there are companies all around the world who design these chemicals to put in your food to drive this particular pleasure trap. And they're the things that will keep people going back to those foods that are very harmful over and over again. So it's not just calorie density, but also those food additives. So here's some principles here. So obviously, we need to look at feeding our needs and not our appetite. We need to stop getting caught in that pleasure trap. Closely linked to that is the next concept here. We need to make changes for overall health rather than just focusing on weight loss alone. It's for your health. And that will also help you to choose the best diet, because some diets out there might promise the world, but they also give you poor health. Now, the other thing is we need to see this as a change for the rest of your life. It's a lifestyle change. It's not something that you're going to go on just for a few months or weeks or even a year. This is something that you need to do for the rest of your life. Now, anything that's worthwhile or real takes time and effort. There is no safe or effective quick fix to life's challenges, and unfortunately, there's not a good one for weight either. It takes time and effort. Always set yourself realistic and achievable goals. Don't worry about others or even societal expectations in any of this. If you set the bar too high, you will give up quickly. And finally, always focus on the successes today. What you're going to achieve today, don't look at the failures of the past, but focus on your journey moving forward. So once you've wrapped your mind around all of these aspects, obviously the choices that you make are going to become a lot easier if you keep these principles in mind. The next step is to find the best diet. At the top of the list there. Now there's lots of options out there, but we need to find one that not only helps you to achieve a healthy weight, but also one that gives you long-term positive health outcomes. This is a diet where it's not about counting calories, but one that burns the most energy. And so there's only one diet in all of the literature, in all of the research, that fits this bill. It is the whole food plant-based diet. That diet rich in fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, grains, seeds in their natural form or as close as possible. Now in this diet we usually get about 80% at least of complex carbohydrates and less than 10% each of the healthy plant proteins and fats. Now this diet actually completely changes the way your body uses up calories or the energy you are consuming. No other diet can achieve the following. It increases the proportion of dietary calories expended as by the body heat or through voluntary physical activity. It has less storage of energy as body fat. There's an overall increase in fat degradation and loss of body fat with this lifestyle choice. You form more of a special brown adipose tissue that greatly enhances your metabolism. It speeds it up. So it stops you putting energy into fat stores and instead uses it to produce body heat. You don't even need to count calories when you're on this diet. And of course, it has all the amazing properties: fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, you name it. All of these things that not only help with getting a healthy weight, but also reduce the risk of a whole host of chronic diseases. And there was an observational study that they did in China that showed that these people were actually eating more calories per unit of body weight than the Westerners, but their BMIs were a lot less, even when you took into account the amount of exercise they were doing. And this was because they had that diet high in complex carbohydrate, low protein, and almost entirely from whole or unprocessed plant-based foods. So they're reaping all of the benefits that we've just outlined, even though they were having more calories per unit of body weight. Now there are certain plant-based foods that really can enhance that weight loss. So let's take a look at some of these. The first one are your leafy greens. We're talking kale, rocket, and the collard greens such as spinach, beet greens and Swiss chards. Now these are high in what they call fat blocking agents, thylakoids. These thylakoids slow down the absorption of fat and allow for very strong signals to be sent to your brain to tell you that you are full, which in turn suppresses your appetite. Interestingly, apples, pears and berries also stand out in the research as foods associated with the most weight loss. Legumes, lentils and beans, all of these are very helpful in suppressing appetite and reducing daily intake of calories. Head to head in the research, legumes are more effective than whole grains at decreasing weight and waistlines, and just as effective as decreasing calories. So you can have lots of legumes, you don't need to worry about your calories. And the last one there is flax seeds, and there's been a whole number of trials that looked at the variety of benefits, but it has been shown to significantly reduce body weight, BMI and waist circumference. Now it has to be in the form of whole or ground flaxseed, not as an extract of the oil to get the benefits. Now there's one thing that has been very huge when it comes to the last few decades in the weight management world, and that are these low carb, high protein diets. But we need to avoid these ones completely. And I'll explain why in the next slide, but here's a list of some of the more common ones and the variations on those. So we got the Atkins, New Atkins or Modified Atkins, keto or any of those ketogenic diets, paleo, protein power, Enter the Zone, South Beach, Sugar Busters, Stillman, Whole 30, and the latest and greatest, the carnivore diet. So essentially, if there's any diet that restricts carbohydrates but encourages protein or fat above that 10% of total intake, you can add it to this list. Now, here's why you need to avoid these types of diets. There's often rapid weight loss granted, but it comes at a huge disastrous cost to your health. Now, in the short term, when compared to those who were just on traditional low-fat diets, they had more bowel effects with both constipation and diarrhea, headaches, muscle cramps, bad breath, generalized weakness, and rashes. These diets also inherently promote the eating of predominantly animal-based foods at the expense of plant-based foods. Therefore, there is a loss of all the health-giving complex carbohydrates, fiber, vitamins and minerals, and a whole host of antioxidants. So all of which are important at reducing that risk of chronic disease, etc. Now, even though you may experience the weight loss, with this diet you're going to increase your risk of all those chronic diseases, and the outcome is quite dramatic. It is very high, these diets are very high in saturated fats and cholesterol, obviously not good for heart disease and stroke. They are also very high in animal protein, which causes high cholesterol, build-up of plaque blockages in the arteries, and also increases the risk of a whole variety of cancers. The weight loss on these types of diets have been consistently shown to be unsustainable. And they actually did a summary of 17 different studies with more than 270,000 subjects. It showed a 31% increase in total deaths when compared to just the standard unhealthy American diet, which already has a high mortality rate. So it's the worst diet of all. Now, fasting is one way you can help with weight loss, but not the kind that I'm talking about, the prolonged one where you go for days. That type of fasting you would need strict medical supervision. I will also say fasting is definitely not an option for those who have very active lives, for children, pregnant or breastfeeding women, insulin-dependent diabetics cannot afford to fast either, and also those who've got unstable chronic diseases. But what we're actually talking about here is overnight fasting. It's about confining your daily meals to a restricted window of time. Now, depending on the research, you've got all sorts of options that you can take, but the one that they recommend is about a 6-hour window ending at 3 p.m. each day, which is not practical for most of us. So you need to look at how this will fit into your lifestyle. But it's very good for not only significant weight loss, but there's also a reduction in oxidative stress. There is an improvement in the insulin resistance, and the average drop in blood pressure is equivalent to using the most potent blood pressure medications. Now, my son used this method, but he obviously didn't wait till 3 o'clock because he had other things going on, so we couldn't go till 3, so he put it at 5 p.m. So he had his 3 meals a day between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And in the last 8 months, he's lost 23 kilos just by using this method. Now, he had a healthy diet, that was never the issue, but obviously if you remember the story I shared last week, he had a very large tumour removed from his chest, but leading up to that, he obviously was getting less and less mobile, and his diet didn't change, but his mobility did, so he was putting on weight. And then obviously coming out the other side, he had to basically build up his stamina from not being able to walk at all to now he can walk about a K1.5. But in that time, what he really focused on was this principle, fasting overnight, having a long overnight fast for him, and confining his calories or confining his meals in an 8-hour window rather than a 6. So if it's doable for you, that's something you might like to try. Obviously, if you lead a very sedentary life, you could make it as a 2-meal-a-day plan. But yeah, for the rest of us, work it around your schedule, work it around what you do for work, and see how much time you can get for that overnight fast. Now, the size of your meal also makes a big difference when it comes to weight management. So the key is eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So of all your meals, put your effort into breakfast. It will kickstart your metabolism, provide the energy for the day's activities when you need it the most. And interestingly, the calories that you eat in the morning cause less weight gain than the same number of calories that you eat of an evening. So you really do need to limit the dinner size and make a nice big breakfast. But yes, interestingly, as the evening progresses, your metabolism continues to drop, thus you need to not have your major meal there. So having a good breakfast also, and loading your food intake too early in the day will make you more alert and productive. It will reduce the need to snack and seek the wrong foods throughout the day, and it also will mean that you don't go to bed on a full tummy, which can interfere with your sleep. Another principle is to eat slowly. Your meal should take a minimum of about 20 minutes, because this is the time it takes for your brain to tell you that you've had enough and that you're feeling full, and so it reduces the number of calories that you take in. Now you can slow down your eating in a number of ways. You can do this by increasing the number of chews and chewing more thoroughly, decreasing your bite size, and this one's probably my favourite. Include bulkier, harder and chewier foods in your meal. A bit more fibrous-y type foods or solid foods to just help you slow down that meal. Another thing that we always need to avoid, snacking. Research has shown that the more frequently a person eats, the more they tend to gain weight. Limiting the number of meals also improves physical endurance. Snacking increases your risk of bowel cancer, and fewer meals improves your metabolism. For some reason, if you increase the number of calories you burn off when you eat them in fewer meals. So it definitely works better metabolically to have your food just in those few meals. Now, whenever I have a conversation about managing someone's weight, this is a very common one that comes up: apple cider vinegar. Now, it does cause significant weight loss, and it particularly targets that nasty visceral fat. It gives you a slimmer waistline while you're using it, however. But it does return as soon as you stop using it, unless you have other measures in place. Now, it works by stimulating a special enzyme called the AMPK. Now, this enzyme is responsible for switching your body from fat storing to fat burning mode. And this apple cider vinegar can ramp its activity up threefold. The problem is, how much do we need to have? 2 tablespoons with each meal. A couple of side notes: don't ever drink it straight, always mix it with food. If you are prone to allergies, it may stir up those allergies, and you can get the same effect with the AMPK just by exercise. So my preference is not to use apple cider vinegar for healthy weight management. My preference is for people to actually just do the exercise to get the same effect. Too much, I mean, this is 6 tablespoons of vinegar each day. That's a lot of vinegar. Alright, now drinking water is absolutely vital for all sorts of reasons. Any healthy lifestyle needs it. But if you ignore your thirst mechanism, your body will resort to hunger signals in an attempt to get your attention and give it some fluid. So thirst is often misinterpreted as hunger. So drinking plenty of water will prevent those abnormal hunger signals. Here's some beautiful aspects of water. Water has no calories, but it does increase the number of calories that your body burns at rest. Now, well-hydrated bodies often shift towards burning fats and decreasing the breakdown of protein. There have been a few studies that show that even just drinking 1 to 1.5 litres per day caused a significant weight loss, and also body mass index and waist circumference in as little as 3 weeks in overweight individuals. So that's not even the usual recommended amount, but just 1 to 1.5 litres per day. Now, the other thing is, drinking 2 cups of water will boost your metabolism by 25% within the next hour. Nothing to be sneezed at. So a good way to help burn those extra calories would be have 2 cups of water on an empty stomach about half an hour before each meal, and obviously we'll reap the benefits of improving the metabolism. For the remainder of your intake, try not to drink with your meals. only between meals, as it can impede digestion somewhat. And there is the amount that we really should be having, about 30 mils per kilogram at rest. You can take that up to 40 mils per kilogram when you're active, but roughly no more than 2.5, 3 litres maximum for a larger person of water each day, obviously depending on your weight and the weather. Always a big no-no, especially when it comes to weight as well. It provides absolutely no nutritional value at all. There's no vitamins or minerals to speak of. Gram for gram, it's almost double the calories of sugar. It hinders your body from burning fat. It causes greater hunger sensations and reduces the feeling of being full. And it leads to poorer food choices. Now, the next aspect that we need to look at is movement. Now, most of us do live quite sedentary lives, so we need to make sure that we make some intentional exercise as part of our goals in healthy weights. Now, bear in mind, exercise is nowhere near as efficient as dietary changes. Probably, if you had to go percentage-wise, 80% diet, 20% exercise. But benefits for exercise go beyond weight management itself. Now, the first tip is try to get more spontaneous movement or activities. So this is the non-planned type exercises, the things that we accrue every day. And the research shows that we actually burn off 5 times more calories from non-exercise activities when compared to formal exercise. So some of the ways we can do that. We can get up and stretch and walk around more often. We can stand instead of sitting, and when you can. In some workplaces, they obviously have those standing desks now. Do more housework, that's not my favourite. Cook and prepare your meals, that's not my favourite either. That's Rui's favourite. Do more gardening is definitely my favourite part. Taking stairs instead of the escalator. Parking your car further away from your workplace or your shopping centre, wherever you need to go. Take your car further away. Singing. Singing burns up lots of calories, so make it a happy lifestyle with lots of singing. And laughing. Laughing actually uses up a fair bit of energy, so good to have a bit of mirth in your lifestyle as well. And dare I say, fidget. When nobody else is watching, fidgeting also burns off those extra calories. So what are some of the formal exercises that are helpful? Let's have a look at some of those. Well, aerobic exercise. This is the stuff that makes you huff and puff. It's a fantastic way at burning calories and reducing the bad fats in the body. Now, brisk walking and cycling are great examples. Interestingly, swimming doesn't seem to provide the same benefit on the weight. It's good for other things, but really the cycling and the brisk walking are the types that you want to get into. So the amount that you need is about 3 to 5 hours per week. That's roughly half an hour to an hour during the day if you're trying to lose weight. The other one is resistance type exercise. This is particularly important. These things such as lifting small weights, resistance bands, body weight type exercise, and this is a type that actually builds up the muscle mass. Now, the more muscle mass that you have, the higher your metabolism, and this will help you to burn more calories around the clock, even at rest. Now, muscle is always more metabolically active than fat, and it requires more energy, so building muscle is important. So this type of exercise also helps to prevent that drop in your metabolism that can occur when you're losing weight. Now, you want to try and include at least 2 sessions a week of some resistance exercise. Interestingly enough, research has also shown that exercise tends to reduce your appetite. You would think it would do the opposite, but it's not true. It reduces the appetite. Now, it's also important to look at when to exercise. Well, the first of all is to obviously on a daily basis if you want to maintain that metabolic benefit. But what about the timing of it each day? Well, more fat is burned on an empty stomach, so it's best to exercise before a meal. In a study where they tested the fat burning capacity of exercise before breakfast and after lunch, they found you burn 90% more fat from the before breakfast exercise. Now, why does this happen? Well, if you exercise after your meal, then you're going to use up some of the sugars in your blood from your recent meal and won't really tap into those fat stores. However, after you've been fasting for a while, you don't have all of that sugar floating around in your bloodstream to use it for energy, so your body will tap into the energy stores and use both fat and glycogen, which is your sugar stores. In turn, that depleted glycogen store signals your fatty tissues to start breaking down even more fat for the rest of the day. So the fat burning continues throughout the rest of the day long after you've stopped exercising. So the key here is to exercise before breakfast to get the most out of this metabolic phenomenon. If you're unable to exercise before breakfast, you still can get some benefits if you exercise on an empty stomach about 6 hours after your last meal. Now, sleep definitely has the role to play when it comes to managing your weight. One analysis of about 20 different studies, having more than 300,000 people in those, found a 41% increased obesity risk among adults who slept fewer than 7 hours per night. So to get the benefits, you need about 7 to 8 hours each night. Now, if you get a really good night's sleep, you will have higher daytime levels of a special hormone, leptin, that makes you feel full. And you'll also get lower levels of another hormone, ghrelin, and that's the one that makes you feel hungry. So there's a decrease in those food-seeking behaviours with a much higher intake of carbohydrates. So research has shown that reducing the hours of sleep in men and women down to about 4 hours led these individuals to seeking out and consuming 1,200 more calories or kilojoules per day on top of their usual intake. And this generally wasn't from healthy food, so there was a consequently twofold increased risk of becoming obese. And it's thought to be due to this phenomenon of those two hormones. Poor sleep has also been shown to adversely affect your self-control and decision-making abilities, as well as increase your brain's reward centres, those pleasure-seeking centres, into food. Therefore, you're more likely to make poor food choices and increase the intake of foods high in energy, fats, and processed sugar. Now, if you're going to bed at a reasonable hour, you also prevent late night slacking, one of those worst habits for causing weight gain. So eating late at night when our metabolism has dropped significantly is associated with greater weight gain, a higher BMI, and decreased fat burning, making weight loss a whole lot more difficult. Now, who would have thought that sunlight could provide you with some benefits? It has some interesting research behind this. There are these little subcutaneous fat cells. These are ones that are found right beneath our skin. It's a major fat deposit in our body, and it does play a significant role in metabolism. Now, it is a kind of bad fat, obviously not as bad as a visceral, but it stores calories that should be burned for energy and does contribute to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Now, a study in the Diabetes Institute in Canada found that the sun's blue light wavelength, which is most powerful in the morning, it penetrates our skin, reaches the fat cells beneath, and these little lipid droplets reduce in size and released out of the cells. It's kind of like they're melting, melts away the fat, helps to burn the bad fat off. And obviously that morning sunlight is the best time to gain these, and of course lots of other benefits of that morning sunlight. Now, weight loss is rarely an easy journey, no matter what type that you choose, but any of them, you always have this issue with plateaus, or most of us do anyway. Now, sometimes you even start with a plateau. Now, this is all considered normal as your body starts to try and conserve some energy as it sees you starting to lose weight. But there are some things that you can do in the short term that help you get off those plateaus. So for a short period of time, you might like to increase your time exercising or even change up the types of exercises that you've been doing. And in particular, you want to target that resistant type exercise to boost the metabolism. If you're having a very sedentary lifestyle, you might want to try that 2-meal-a-day plan and get as long as you can overnight fasting. Always reassess your diet and water intake. Make sure there's nothing that can be adjusted. And then if it all is in order, you might like to try a raw plant-based food diet just for a couple of weeks. It's not something that's advisable for long term, but only eat those foods that are meant to be eaten raw. Don't eat raw foods that should be cooked. And most of all, be patient, remain focused. This too will pass. Curbing those cravings. Another difficult thing to deal with when it comes to managing your weight. And unfortunately, we tend to crave the worst foods, not the healthiest foods. So here's some evidence-based ways to help with those cravings. Include more plant-based proteins in your meal, such as legumes or even a small handful of nuts when you're eating a meal. Include more soluble fibre. Good sources include all your apples and pears, bananas, berries, legumes, nuts and avocados. And make sure you're well hydrated. Remember, dehydration can often be misperceived as hunger. And make sure you have a good night's sleep. So always check to see that you're sleeping well. That will help to reduce that hunger hormone ghrelin. Now, there are some very helpful herbs that can assist with weight loss. Garlic always comes up, doesn't it? This is a wonder little herb, this one. So you could either eat that raw if you aren't going out in public, but to get the benefit for weight loss, you actually only need half a teaspoon of garlic powder a day to drop your weight and waistline. So it's not a huge amount that you need. Now, ginger root, another very effective way to boost your metabolism by at least 10% in comparison to placebo in the trials. Now, dried ginger is actually more effective than fresh. So the gingerol compounds are turned into what we call the Shogols, which activate the brown adipose tissue, which stimulates the metabolism. And you only need about half a teaspoon of dried ginger a day. And certainly it's an easy thing to add into some nice stir fries or into smoothies and things like that. It's a very easy one to get. Then we have good old-fashioned peppermint. It's only been shown to be helpful in animal studies. They haven't done it in human studies yet, but it has been shown to boost the metabolism in animals. It regulates the body weight and prevents obesity in that setting. So although it hasn't been tested in human use, it certainly wouldn't harm to use this on a regular basis, and it has some fantastic benefits to your gut health as well. And the dose there is 6 grams of the dried leaf daily. Now, we looked at hibiscus last week in the context of heart disease, in particular blood pressure, but we also know that it's very helpful at also dropping the waistline as well. Now, in terms of how much, 3 grams of the dried calla seeds daily. And the research shows that it can boost your metabolism and particularly lock up the fat digesting enzyme in the gut. And finally, just having a look at another option here, and that's hydrotherapy. So having contrast showers stimulates the production of that adipose tissue, and obviously that boosts the metabolism and leads to a more efficient weight loss. And there's your contrast shower recipe again. 5 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold. Do that again, 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, making the water as hot as you can tolerate it without burning yourself, and on the coldest setting on the cold portion, and you always end on the cold. And you want to try and do this at least 3 times a week. Now, not advisable, as I will always remind you, if you're particularly frail or have any heart rhythm or very high blood pressure issues. So here's my weight management prescription for you. Remember that your body is a temple and a gift from God, so value it as God does. This is a lifestyle change and not just a temporary diet, so eat for your health. Keep your goals realistic. If it's taken you years to get where you are, allow your body time to adjust and restore. Embrace that whole food plant-based diet with lots of those weight loss boosting foods, apples, pears, berries, leafy greens and legumes, and don't forget that spoonful of flaxseed. And of course, avoid all those processed foods, fast foods with added fats, and no alcohol. Plan your meals and have the most hearty meal in the morning and the smallest at night. If you lead a sedentary life, then consider that 2 meal a day plan. Eat slowly and avoid snacking between meals. Try to drink at least 2 to 2.5 litres of water per day, and 2 glasses of water before your meals and the remainder between your meals. Try to get exercise in before breakfast. At least do about 3 hours per week of the aerobic huff and puff. And of course, don't forget a couple of sessions of that resistance type exercise. Always aim for 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night. Get a good dose of morning sunlight, at least half an hour after the sun rises. Have a hibiscus and ginger tea a couple of times a day, or you can throw a bit of peppermint in there as well. And don't forget your contrast showers 2 to 3 times each week. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rach. So good and always good to listen to you. And I'll give up any time in my time to come and listen to you talk. Everything you talk makes sense.